Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another installment of ISV Connect Live. It's an honor and pleasure to have Scott from DocuSign join this specific session, this Monday session today. But before we introduce Scott, again, like I normally do, a few housekeeping items just to get this conversation started. One off, we truly appreciate those of you who are tuning this live or maybe watching the replay. We appreciate you making the time to actually watch this and be informed on all things related to Microsoft BizApps ecosystem programs, partnership programs, but in particular, our amazing ISVs and our BizApps global ISVs that I typically highlight on these calls to join us. As we're going through the conversation, we'd love to hear where you're watching from. So in the LinkedIn window, if you'd like to just type in the city, location where you're watching from, would love to kind of hear where you might be sitting down because Scott's from the Bay Area. I'm doing this from Seattle. Hopefully you did the time change. It's my body clock is still getting used to acclimating of the gaining an hour, and it's weird to look outside and first thing in the morning, like, it's actually a little lighter outside. It's not super dark. So with that said, also, besides questions that you might want to ask and putting in the window, feel free to use one of the emoji or the emotional icons down below, like, support, etc., because that also gives us an opportunity to understand that the content that you're listening to is super valuable. So, and thanks, Tyler. Let's see, we already got one person putting in the window. Yes, it is a beautiful, somewhat a beautiful day. It's actually not raining and the sun's coming out. So thanks, Tyler. So with that being said, Scott, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
Start out with, what do you do? What's your role specifically at DocuSign? And then as I ask all my guests, what's one thing you're open to sharing that's not on your LinkedIn profile?
Sure thing. Yeah, Scott Harrison. I manage strategic alliance partners for DocuSign. Been working with Microsoft for many years now. Very excited to be here. I'm based in the Bay Area. And I guess the one thing I'd share is on my LinkedIn profile would be just probably one of the things I most have enjoyed recently in terms of pandemic activities. With everything kind of shutting down, we really, over the last couple of years, have gotten into backpacking. And I had several trips to Yosemite over the last couple of summers with multiple families, backpack, probably like 5-6 hours into the woods, hanging out by waterfalls, doing day hikes. We climbed Half Dome, if any of you are familiar with that. But yeah, that's been kind of what we've been up to outside of work.
Oh, I love it, Scott. Yeah, I mean, especially in your neck of the woods, there's so many, well, even in California, the redwoods and so many close places in the Bay Area, close to the Bay Area where you live, where you can also go backpacking. I love it. Yeah, that's one place also that's on my family's bucket list is actually go to Yellowstone and go to one of our huge national parks and
nice, yeah,
in the area. Yeah. So before we get started, and you and another shout out, thanks for joining. Yeah, it's already getting dark because it is whatever 8 or 9 hours. I can't remember. I know that because of the gap you celebrated or transitioned to daylight savings time. It got us daylight saving time a week earlier, but yeah, welcome. Thanks, Ewan. So as we get started, Scott, I think most people know DocuSign because it's very well-known brand. But for those who don't, why don't you describe a little bit about what DocuSign does? What are the outcomes that DocuSign helps to deliver with joint customers?
Yeah, absolutely. So DocuSign, if you're familiar with it from the early days, really started in real estate. It was used for signing like all the forms you would sign to buy or refinance a house. As probably a lot of people know, that's often a considerable pile of paperwork and very painful. But really, we've grown into just globally all over the place, all industries, into the enterprises. I mean, we're used by major banks, by major pharmaceuticals for drug development. We're used really across the board in enterprise, mid-market, majors, and we're actually a pretty sizable company now. In terms of what we solve, we used to, as I mentioned, and probably most people think of us as eSignature, we've really expanded into what we call the agreement cloud. We're really, helping companies manage their agreements. Signing is an important part of that, but when we talk about, DocuSign now, we usually talk about it in the term of like 4 verbs: prepare, So preparing your documents, sign your documents, act. After you've signed something, you need to act on it, right? You need to deliver a service to a customer, or you need to, it could be as simple as updating a database, but you've acted on those agreements. And then manage. Well, what do you do with all the thousands of documents you have afterwards that are signed? That in and of itself, just managing renewal, when they come up for renewal, when legislation or regulation changes and suddenly you have to go back and make sure you're compliant with the latest PII policies or what have you, changes in financial rules, regulations as well, right? So we get into even like artificial intelligence in there in terms of analyzing agreements and seeing where you have things you need to manage. This really neatly fits into our partnership with Microsoft, which we're super excited about, right? So when you talk about preparing an agreement for signature, where do we prepare agreements? Usually Word, right? And you can prepare them in a variety of other platforms there. We talk about signing. We can sign agreements really in multiple places with Microsoft, with Word, within Outlook, within Dynamics, within SharePoint, within Power Automate, within within Teams, one of the ones we're most excited about right now. So signing is an obvious thing. Act, I think Power Automate. Again, we're triggering a workflow. I've signed an agreement. I've got something that needs to be done or updated. And then manage. We talk about that. We think about SharePoint, right? We think about Dynamics. So anyway, so we do think about we're solving that problem of managing your agreements, and we look at that really from a regional and a global perspective as well, in terms of not only having solutions that fit the eSignature and regulations in the United States or North America, but those regulations and rules are different in Europe. They're different in Asia. So we really come to the table with global solutions.
I love it, Scott. I mean, what a great summary too when you say the agreement cloud, because you think about that and you touched on the capabilities of where a user would actually do that. It's in a variety of different ways, and I think that's one of the amazing things from a business process perspective, business outcomes. When you think about that agreement, that happens in all these stages of business process. And where DocuSign is amazing is the fact that you fit into all those capabilities and scenarios across the broad Microsoft cloud itself. And so that's a good segue into just the partnership. I mean, granted, DocuSign is in kind of the same headquarters in the same neck of the woods as well. Microsoft, just in the Pacific Northwest area, Seattle versus Redmond. So talk a little bit about, because of course you've been a senior leader driving alliances at DocuSign. What has that experience been like in working across the Microsoft ecosystem with DocuSign and Microsoft from what you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, I think the foundation of this partnership and really, it's crucial. You have to get it right. Is you have to get the product right. You have to get the integration right. You have to have a good user experience. It has to be built in a way that is intuitive, easy to use, works quickly, solves customer problems, right? So I'd say that the first area that we're thrilled about our partnership with Microsoft has been on the development front. As I mentioned, there's a slew of products where we've got integrations already built out of the box. We've collaborated very tightly with Microsoft on those. When I think about Teams, the most recent one, when Microsoft started to lean in on Teams, they approached us and said, "Hey, we really want to do more things with this." This is a lot, like probably about 2 years ago. Our development teams got together. We looked at the customer problems we're trying to solve. We designed what we thought were good solutions. Then over time, we've been iterating on those things, right? And I could tell you the same story around Dynamics. I could tell you the same story around SharePoint. I mean, the partnership goes back a long way. So, there's the long history of working together on the product front. Microsoft's very good about working with us on that. When I look over at the business side, there are programs like ISV Connect that we just recently joined. Very excited about that. The ability to work together in the field and to partner to solve customer problems is really exciting, highly valued by our company. And honestly, it's the best thing for the customers, right? I mean, we have to be able to work together seamlessly to get problems solved in the real world. And that's what these types of programs do for us and do for our customers. So we're really excited about that. I'd say just in general, having worked across multiple ecosystems, Microsoft has a lot of partnership muscle. I mean, the number of programs, the number of people, the focus of Microsoft on working with partners, it's kind of the attitude, like it's really great. So yeah, I've been very, very happy to work in the ecosystem and to work with all the great people at Microsoft.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Scott. Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, DocuSign is actually managed at a global level. And so to what Scott was referring to on kind of the execution, that's one of the great things in this partnership is being able to work very collaboratively across, not just on the business and the co-sell execution of it, but as Scott referenced, Scott, the whole R&D engagement and connection point and the innovation that can come to bear, because of course what Microsoft and DocuSign had many years ago is not the same as to what it is now, as well as
it's always changing. It's always changing. Yeah,
that's right. And the innovation you mentioned with Teams, and you think about collaboration in that specific use case scenario, not just within Dynamics, but in kind of collaboration scenarios that exist in Teams. It is amazing to see the innovation and the opportunity of what that can bring to bear in outcomes that you mentioned. Is like, hey, wherever that agreement needs to occur, wherever that process is happening, there's a solution for that. There's a scenario that exists between DocuSign and Microsoft to showcase that capability so that the seamlessness of where that user is going to interact with that or do something with that agreement, whatever stage they're in can actually go and do that. So let's talk about, Scott, about the maybe some customer examples that you've come across. So all these things that you mentioned about what DocuSign does from beginning to end across the agreement, what are some of the example scenarios that you come across with you and your teams on the joint outcomes that we've solved with some joint customers?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about use cases and I think about horizontal use cases, I think first comes to mind is the sales use case.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're talking to a head of sales or CRO or a sales VP about solving their problems around agreements, what's their problem? Their problem is getting agreements signed as quickly as possible.
That's right.
Often at the end of the quarter with whatever it is, 15 minutes to go. I mean, I think a lot of us who are in sales have been there, right? So the value proposition on sales is speed, and like eSignature and some of these agreement solutions we have together really facilitate that. Having your ability to be within a record in Dynamics and send an agreement out for signature and get it back, and pull data, vice versa, from the systems together to kind of put together the right agreement, right quote, get that out to a customer, get it signed and back in time. That's great from a speed perspective. It's also great from a customer experience perspective. We always talk about customer experience as being really critical. Having high NPS scores has always been something we've really prided ourselves on. So sales is a great example use case. When we turn around, we look internally a little bit, you get into HR. So there you're talking about employee experiences. And again, we've got solutions that span the ecosystem, the Microsoft ecosystem. Dynamics, for example, can be used for that. But again, what you're doing there is you're often doing things like, you're dealing with employee paperwork, you're dealing with offer letters that are going out to candidates. Again, we all know today it's a very intense environment to bring new people in. The job market is very tight, so getting your offer letter out quickly and having someone view you as a digital first company right. is kind of important. I mean, I don't want to work for a company that sends me something in the mail in paper, right? So right. Offer letters is a good example. Onboarding. Do you remember how painful onboarding was before eSignature and before we had agreement solutions like this? So HR is a good one. That one's more about employee candidate experience, and then there's also a big efficiency element. If you think about the example of chasing down, the 5,000 employees, get them all to sign an NDA or get them to sign a new security policy, as opposed to having all that be automated in a solution. And then probably the third horizontal solution I talk about would be procurement. So, you know, that's the other side of sales, is managing agreements with your vendors and making sure that, you know, you're building the right contracts that have the right clauses, that have the right information, and all of that is seamlessly handled. That's another thing that we kind of bring together. A good actual customer example that just go back to HR is the Department of Child Safety. We've been working with them for years now on a dynamic solution. You know, it starts really with, they originally were starting with kind of like status change, internal paperwork, personnel forms, and then they eventually moved, and that was for 3,000 employees, and they eventually moved to a solution that we're actually handling child welfare forms, right, for 15,000 kids that they're trying to manage and,
Yeah.
and get through and get into the right spot. There are lots of other examples of that. For example, NGOs that are using their forms to organize activities globally for disaster relief.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've seen Dynamics and DocuSign solutions deployed in places like that. Yeah, just lots of good customer value out there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Scott. It's amazing to see the different use cases there across horizontal, but the industries you serve, because I'm sure the pandemic in particular has created this amazing need, because no one's known for face-to-face signature type of stuff, regardless whatever business you're in. But I love the scenarios you talk about from a sales perspective. I think about it as lead to quote. So, or lead to signature, really, is like you get some prospect and you're taking through the process. And you mentioned NDA. NDAs are so critical, even in the selling cycle, because of the process that needs to be involved if you're going to exchange some type of initial thing to see, is this something we actually should go down a farther path with, not just the NDA, but that signature process to actually get a contract signed, I think is spot on. The second one that I think I heard you say was just the human capital management. So many of you listening to this conversation live or maybe on a replay, you've probably come across human capital management scenarios, and recruiting, to your point, becomes this huge part of that to get to your point, those offer letters out, so that no longer are you faxing something. I remember back in the day, it's like we've all been in that, like, wow, any of you used to fax back in the day when you couldn't actually physically put something in front of someone or sign it, or put it in a FedEx envelope. I remember those days too, where someone FedExed you something. They put a little sticky note saying sign here, and then put it back in a FedEx envelope so it goes back somewhere else. And then the final one, you mentioned procurement. When I think about business process procure to pay scenarios, and your point, how do you pay your vendors or people in the process to actually drive whatever outcome that from a back office, traditional enterprise resource planning scenario is great. So when you think about next steps, Scott, like how would you suggest people learn more about what DocuSign can provide and the scenarios that you guys can bring to bear?
Well, you know, there's definitely a lot of things we're always happy to talk to you about. There's links below this. Links below there. There it is.
Yeah, there it is.
Below, and there's information there about our partnership. There's actually a trial there that you can test out DocuSign for yourself. And then there's more information about some of the products themselves. So yeah, I mean, I'd say learn more, reach out. We've got a lot of people who'd be happy to talk to you about solving your agreement cloud needs. And, you know, especially in regards to, you know, Microsoft, I think there's some really amazing capabilities there that you can explore, you know, depending on which Microsoft products you are using or thinking about using. I mean, DocuSign's got a solution for them. So yeah, just be kind of excited to engage and see if we can move the conversation forward with folks who are interested.
Yeah, that's great, Scott. So a few last things before we wrap up. We actually got a few more people putting comments in the window, which is great to see. So thanks, Sean. I don't know why sometimes LinkedIn does this, but thanks for watching from Ireland, one of my favorite places to go. And then we'll ask this one from you. And so he asks, speaking of pandemic, how's the pandemic affected customer intake of DocuSign? What kind of trends or things have you seen?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's, I think our CEO likes to say it's moved everything forward something like 5 years.
Okay.
I would say having an e-signature solution was a great idea before the pandemic, but when the pandemic hit, you suddenly had a lot of people working. Let's be honest, most people, if not all people, working remotely, right?
Right.
And you're not talking to your customers face to face. So like the idea of like mailing documents around to get people to sign them just doesn't really work anymore. So everything really has to go virtual. So we saw a considerable uptake after the pandemic, and I feel like it was a great opportunity for DocuSign to help the world keep moving. You know, like our employees have been working so hard since this started. We've been adding people pretty quickly as well, and we're really, you know, the company of course prioritized taking care of our employees as well as our customers. You know, so we went virtual immediately. But I just have to say the team really has done, I think, a great job of keeping up with the demand and trying to get the solutions out there that people need to keep business moving during the pandemic. You know, and I think about specific things like DocuSign's been used for things like PPO loans. DocuSign's been used to solve for, like, I think we've seen a huge uptick in HR paperwork because, again, people aren't in the office. You know, we've seen things around notary where people are still buying homes, but are you know, don't want to meet
face to face.
Yeah, they don't want to meet face to face. We've seen major institutions like banks. We've seen clinical trials. You know, I think it's really just been across the board. There's been a lot of solutions that DocuSign and partners like Microsoft have been able to supply during the pandemic. So really.
Yeah, that's great, Scott. And as you said that, I'm like, oh, because we did a refinance when the market rates were so low. And so we refinanced again. And I'm thinking back at that scenario that happened last year, and it was done on DocuSign because the notary person, that person still had to come to our spot to get our to do some things. But in particular, leading up to that process, it was all eSignature via DocuSign. As I remember, the mortgage company that we were working with, it came through a DocuSign scenario. So yeah, it's great to see. So with that being said, we do have a video as we close out that we're going to run at the end. But any last parting words, Scott, for to closing out this session?
I'm just really glad to have had the opportunity to talk to you, to talk to the viewers, and you know, I look forward to seeing you and everyone again soon.
Great. Sounds good. Well, thanks again, Scott. We truly appreciate you making the time on a Monday. We truly value the partnership that we've driven between DocuSign and Microsoft. So thanks again. And then for those of you watching live or the replay, again, let me just flash up in the window. Just aka.ms/DocuSign has a compile of all the things that would be potentially interesting to you. If anything that Scott from DocuSign had said that caught your attention that's valuable regarding agreements and that process across Microsoft, definitely take the time and write that down and come back to it whenever you can to learn more. So thanks again, Scott, for making the time, and we'll talk soon. Thanks again, everybody, for watching, and we're going to run this this video at the end. Thank you very much. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
DocuSign is changing how business gets done by empowering anyone to electronically send, sign, and manage agreements. DocuSign now integrates with your favorite Microsoft business applications, including Office 365, Dynamics 365, and SharePoint. Save time, save money, and enhance productivity across your organization with DocuSign and Microsoft. See for yourself. Go to DocuSign.com/Microsoft to learn